Hello. Before we get started, just want to thank our friends at Sheffield Watches and their support in helping us bring you great guests like Brett Berk.
Sheffield Watches offer value based on merit, not just price. You can find Sheffield Watches at sheffieldwatches.com and at Sheffield_allsport_watches on Instagram. Thanks. Hey, it's The Road Show, and I'm here with Alan and Lindsay today. And joining us is someone we're really excited to talk with, someone whose work we all really admire. If you follow automotive journalism at all, you know the name Brett Berk. Hell, I think if you read anything, you probably know the name Brett Berk, because I think Brett's written for just about every publication of note there is, including Road and Track, Car and Driver, Architectural Digest, the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Advocate, Vogue, Jalopnik, and many, many others. Brett's thoughtful and clever style and unique take on some of the often overlooked aspects of the automotive world really put him in a class of one, and we're thrilled to have him here. Brett Berk, welcome to The Road Show.
Welcome. Wow, thanks for that intro. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is something we've been excited about for a long time. And if you don't know Brett, where did you grow up? I know a little bit of your story, but where did you grow up?
Sure.
You were always a car guy.
Yeah, I'm from Detroit originally. And yeah, I loved cars from when I was a little kid, like many people who love cars. My first sort of love in the automotive world was really classic cars from the interwar era. So cars of the 20s and 30s. When I had my bar mitzvah when I was 13, my bar mitzvah cake was in the shape of a Duesenberg SJ Ralston coupe. So that should give you some indication of my proclivities.
Why those cars? I mean, obviously they're amazing cars, but why, as a young guy, I mean, that's a little different.
I don't know. Yeah, I've always been a weirdo. I think
you're in good company.
Yeah, I think that it was, I grew up in the 70s, sort of during the malaise era in Detroit. There wasn't a lot of exciting iron coming out back then. There was a lot of stuff still on the roads, obviously, but I never really was drawn to, like traditional American muscle cars or things like that. I loved, this is going to sound stupid, but I loved luxury, and I liked luxury cars from when I was a little kid. And those cars, were sort of the highest exemplars of that. And particularly the American cars of that era. If we think about Auburns, Cords, Duesenbergs, Packards, Lincolns, Cadillacs from that time period, these were pinnacle cars. This is a time when the American auto industry was really at its prime, and leading the world in a lot of ways. And so I think, being having a strong sense of my Detroit roots, I think that lent itself to sort of finding an affection for those vehicles. I also had like a third grade teacher whose husband was a classic car nut, and sort of helped push me in that direction. I remember doing like school book reports about classic cars and interviewing him. And so, that just became a thing. I did start, this is a long-winded answer to a very short question.
No.
A few years back about sort of how kids get into cars. You know what? Let's come back to that.
Sure.
Let's come back to that.
My mind is just going to that time. You've just created this magical, romantic image of Detroit back then, and the cars rolling out of the line. Everything's fresh and new, and everyone's proud of what they've got and who they work for. And was it really like that back then? Was it?
I mean, in the 70s, I think maybe slightly less so. There was a lot of things that had changed in the industry in the 70s, and there was a lot of contention that was happening with the rise of imported vehicles. But Detroit really was, it's an industry town, and that's very strong. There's a very strong sense of that. We had neighbors that worked on the line, and things like that, and had the Real Americans Buy American Cars bumper stickers and all of those kinds of things. Imported vehicles. You were sort of a trader if you drove an imported vehicle, especially a Japanese vehicle during that time period. And this was there was still a strong sense of hometown pride around that. It still definitely exists.
I remember watching a program where there was a husband worked at Ford and the wife worked at GM, I think, and so they were sort of talking about like the rivalry there. And for me, it was the same growing up in Australia. In Melbourne, you have the Bay, and on one side you have Ford, on the other side you have Holden, have GM. And it was very fierce rivalry between the two. And I did a deal with General Motors for a car racing team, and my dad didn't talk to me for a month. He was a hard Ford fan. So
Well,
the passion.
that was an interesting thing, an interesting divide growing up in Detroit. There was sort of a East Side West Side thing that happened, and this was a religious and cultural divide as well. And in that, the East Side was predominantly non-Jewish, and the West Side of the city was where the sort of the Jewish neighborhoods were, and because of the virulent anti-Semitism of Henry Ford, Jews really didn't buy Ford products and things like that. So we were a GM family. My great grandfather worked on the line for General Motors for Chevrolet all through the Depression. He was an immigrant who came over from Russia, from Ukraine.
I
And
didn't realize it ran that deep in even
yeah,
into the
and
Ford, oh, sorry, the automotive community.
that was definitely a big part of it. Yeah,
Hmm.
no one in my family ever drove Fords, and some of that was just I think based on that past employment, but some of it was definitely based around the anti-Semitism.
Sure, sure. Yeah, you're the son of teachers. You were a teacher, is that right?
I'm not the son of teachers. Neither of my
Okay,
parents were teachers,
okay.
but I was a teacher. Yeah,
You were.
I trained. I worked in the classroom for 11 years. I trained as an early childhood educator
Okay.
and did a master's degree in early childhood education and child development, and ran a preschool of my own in New York City. I worked in early
Wow.
childhood, so worked with like 2 to 6 year olds. Yeah, and had my own school for 4 years after working as an assistant and
So
as a classroom teacher.
you're primed well to work with us then. So you can read us like a
I find
book now.
I find it comes in very handy for dealing with most adults.
I was going to say, shout out to the teachers too. You mentioned, the influence that I think it was your second or third grade teacher had on you, and you were already writing about cars back then. And so, shout out to the teachers. Don't get enough respect, And
Yeah.
you mentioned too that your entree was luxury, which is kind of different, right? What is luxury in 2024 anymore? We talk about this all the time. It's been different things in different eras, right? And now with electric cars and all that, it was technology maybe in the 80s represented luxury, 90s. What is luxury now in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's about isolation. It's about sort of removing perceptible imperfection, removing a sense of noise or discomfort, and really making the car be sort of this cocoon. Um, so I think that's a big part of it. I think that's what consumers are looking for in a lot of ways. There's so much going on. There's so much distraction. There's so much noise happening elsewhere that people are looking for a place that really is a sanctuary that sort of isolates them and insulates them. And I think we see this, even with sporting marks like or formerly sporting marks like BMW, that cars have become far more insulated and isolated. And I think this is a demand that they're responding to, a demand in the marketplace.
And so when you think of luxury, it's not just necessarily like big SUVs. It has an element that runs through all models, all sizes, all variants, or
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think that those who understand the nature of luxury get that. I think that there's, it's experiential in a lot of ways. I know this is an
Very much.
overused term, but we see this across all sorts of different categories in terms of luxury experiences. In hotels, in dining, and things like that. People will want something special. People want something unique. People want to feel special and unique.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
it's more than just being able to purchase something. It's about sort of being a member of a club or being granted access. And we see this in the way that luxury brands are sort of luxury automotive brands are sort of replicating themselves across various other industries. Opening apartment buildings and apartment towers in Miami, or creating, customer experience centers, or like Genesis and Lexus and some others have done, even restaurants and dining experiences in New York City that really take this luxury to where the consumers are. There's a lot of stuff in boating and yachting that we see
Right.
automotive
Right.
brands getting involved in.
Yeah.
Aston Martin even did a thing with Triton subs. This was before the sub disaster. To create an Aston Martin branded submersible.
No
So all
kidding.
of these things are places where we're seeing these brands, and this is because they want to be where their consumers are already, and to create this sort of 360-degree experience of brand understanding and awareness and comprehension.
That's interesting because you can really speak from a holistic perspective, because you do write for, Vanity Fair and Town and Country and some of these, these magazines that aren't just cars, right? And there is crossover, right? I mean, luxury is not just a car concept, right? I mean, it really is. It's interesting to see those same trends, I guess, run through these other platforms. It's interesting. It's how'd you become the car journalist who sort of writes about cars and other things, but for non-car magazines and websites? I mean, how did that sort of become your
Yeah.
thing?
Do you want the whole long origin story?
Please,
Yes.
yeah.
All right. I'll try to keep it brief. As we mentioned, I was a teacher. I decided to get out of the classroom. I was a writer first. I studied fiction writing as an undergraduate at Oberlin College. I was a creative writing major there, and I was always sort of writing even when I was in the classroom. When I got out of the classroom, my boyfriend and I, but he's a writer as well, we decided, we're going to quit our jobs, leave New York, and try to figure out a way to sort of exist with a greater emphasis on our writing. And so I was writing all sorts of different things, mostly short stories, and then I was doing a lot of consulting work with in the kids space for companies that made educational media, consumer products, toys, and games, and things like that for kids. Anyway, after a little while, my friends started to have kids, and I realized, given my expertise in the area, having worked with thousands of kids, that they were really bad at being parents. They were doing it completely wrong. So I decided that I wanted to write a parenting book based on my experiences in the classroom as a child development expert, and to sort of showcase, some of the effective strategies that had worked. Their sample size generally was one or two. My sample size was several hundreds or thousands. So I thought, I had maybe a perspective, even though I don't have kids of my own, that might be useful. So I sold a parenting book to Crown, which is a part of Random House. It's called The Gay Uncle's Guide to Parenting. It was an expert outsider's guide on raising kids, and it was filled with snarky anecdotes about my friends and family members, and what they were doing wrong, and then my excellent advice about what they could be doing
How did
different.
that go down with the friends and family?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, mostly it was interesting people. The best thing about it was that everyone recognized themselves. Obviously, I showed it to people before the book went to press to ask if there was anything egregious that they wanted me to change or eliminate. But mainly the response was, I can't believe so and so is so crazy. Like calling out
That's
someone
really
else
funny.
in the book. There's always someone crazier than them in the book.
So it was a
Anyway,
relief.
I wrote this. Yeah, it was a relief to them. I know. Yeah, people felt seen, I guess. Maybe not in the best way. So after that book came out, or in the process of coming out, my agent suggested that I get in touch with people I knew in media to try to help publicize the book, to write about the topics of parenting and child development, to get my name out there as an expert. So I made all sorts of appointments with friends and friends of friends and acquaintances of friends to try to do that. And I started to publish a little bit about parenting and child development. And I, had known people in the magazine industry throughout my earlier careers, but had never really approached it myself. So this was sort of an interesting thing. I met someone at a party up here, actually at my place upstate, near my place upstate, who was a friend of one of our friends up here. Who, this was 2008, was an editor at Vanity Fair and was just taking over and starting their website, which up until that point had essentially been a repository of cover images from the magazine, and was trying to turn it into a viable concern. And I told him about the book, and he had read something, read some of it or whatever. And he asked me to do some writing for the site about some kid related stuff, and so I started doing a little bit of that. And then, he was like, and I was interested in continuing, and he was interested in continuing to use my voice. And so he said, what else are you interested in writing about? I sent him this whole long list of things. I have a broad range of interests, mid-century architecture, 19th century landscape painting, moss gardening. And then I said, I always sort of had this closet interest in cars. I was openly gay, but loving cars was not something that I generally shared with a lot of my friends. It's not something that they were interested in, not something I understood. I tell this story often that when I
That's
was in
interesting.
college, I would hide in the public library to read car magazines where I knew that no one would see me. So anyway, he was like, he came back a little while later and was like, why don't you do like a car column for us? We never really had cars as content. So of course I said yes. And I started doing that, back in 2008, a weekly car column for Vanity Fair. And then I started doing some automotive stuff for the magazine. And then I started going to events, and we went to auto shows back when we had auto shows, and traveling around and things like that, and meeting other people. And having grown up in Detroit, I knew some people in the automotive journalism world already. I'd gone to high school with Eddie Alterman, who was a freelance writer at that point and had started MPH, and was on his way to becoming the editor-in-chief of Car and Driver. So I just sort of started networking around in that world a little bit.
Yeah.
And because I'm compulsive and I like to hustle, it sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah.
And after a few years, it turned into a full-time career. This is what I do full-time now,
The
pretty
great
much.
thing was, you were doing it because you were genuinely enthusiastic about cars, and there were things that were exciting you. So having the ability to put that down in words is something that a lot of people struggle with. So and just even listening to you now, you do paint very clear pictures for me in my mind. So it's definitely a skill to have that. I know Ryan has this running through his blood as well. So I don't. I draw pictures for a living. That's what I do. So thankfully, but
It's a
Yeah, I
different
think a
kind of
part of
art.
yeah,
I came to it as a writer first. I think a lot of people get into this out of their love of cars first, and the
yes,
writing.
true.
I've had people say this to me directly. The writing is this thing that they feel like they have to do in order to maintain this
Yep.
connection. I came to it, as a writer first, and someone who's also passionate about cars in the industry, and someone who's also trained in market research and sort of consumer segmentation, things like that. So very interested in sort of figuring out like who goes with what and what goes where, and also as someone who's just always had like a broad range of interests, finding the connections between the automobile and all the other things I'm interested in. So that's sort of been my niche, is sort of finding the connections between cars and culture. So, art, books, fashion, movies, music, celebrity, politics, whatever it might be. These are the things, the car touches us in so many ways and touches our lives in so many ways, that it's, that's been very rewarding and fun for me to try to draw out and tease out those connections, especially for people who might not be gearheads, you know what I mean? Might not be, automotive enthusiasts.
Right.
Well, I was just a subscriber. Sorry, Lindsay. I was just going to say, I was a subscriber of Vanity Fair when you started your column. And I just remember seeing that. It was almost sort of validation of this interest. Like, this isn't this lowbrow thing anymore. I don't have to be embarrassed, right? Like, I can be a car guy and an educated person, right? Yeah. So
We're all
I remember that. And I didn't realize that's where
right?
you started. Yeah. That's,
Yeah, exactly. So this, it's in some ways accidental and in some ways intentional. I think like all the best things in life.
It sounds
So
like very natural progression of what you were saying with your early interest in luxury, and there's like the Duesenbergs, like perfect sense looking back that you would end up writing for Vanity Fair, Rob Report, like
Yeah.
your
What a
article
classy
for
start.
Architectural Digest about, the
Yeah.
Lincoln
Yeah.
Navigator launch. But I think why do you think you were so aware of luxury and cars like the Duesenberg era from such a young age? That's really unique.
Yeah. Well, I did this story. This is a story I was going to tell earlier. I did this story a few years back for Car and Driver. My editor, the editor in chief, then Sharon Carty, came to me. She was like, "We've got this idea for a story. I think you'd be, great to handle it." I'm a contributing editor, so I write for them a lot. Um, but it was sort of about this idea of how kids become passionate about cars, like how and why that happens, and why it sort of sticks with some people and why it doesn't with others. And the end up, isn't totally mind blowing, but it's proven and makes sense. And so I found these scholars, these researchers at University of Indiana, and then I think maybe they had moved to Rice or some other university in Texas, maybe Texas A&M. At any rate, they had done this longitudinal study of hundreds of kids from essentially, when they were toddlers up until now. The oldest ones were, high teens or early 20s at this point, the point that I was doing the research for this story. And they were sort of looking at, how kids get into cars or whatever their passion might be,
Right.
Planets or dinosaurs or princesses or ballet or whatever,
Yeah.
fashion. And, essentially it's about a number of different things. One, having some exposure to the concept. It doesn't have to be a family member's interest, or doesn't have to be something like that. Then finding ways to have that interest continually ratcheted up so that it's age appropriate and deepening. And then, as peers become more important, finding a peer group that's also potentially interested in that is relevant and validating. And then later in like late adolescence, there's also kids start to see a potential for a career path, in a hobby. And that can either continue or rekindle an interest that they may have, that they call it finding an off ramp. They may have found an off ramp too. So,
It's appropriate.
yeah. So for my own interest in automobiles and classic cars and luxury cars, I was fortunate in that my father, who has absolutely no interest, or well, I wouldn't say no, but little interest in cars, and really drove a broad range of extraordinarily boring vehicles throughout my entire life. Despite my intense pressure for them to try other things.
We're going to
He
come back to that point.
Yeah, I think we all have a story there. Yeah.
Yeah.
he was great about sort of providing these continued escalating on, continuing the on ramp escalation for me as a kid. So when I was in fourth grade or something like that, I was at a pullout group of students who were academically gifted, quote unquote, so to speak. And we would do like independent research projects. And I did an independent research project about E.L. Cord, who was this sort of auto magnate back in the 20s and 30s, who eventually owned Auburn, Cord, and Duesenberg. And helped to sort of, create and foster all of those brands. And I'd done this long, year-long research project about that. And my father helped me learn how to use the card catalog and how to look things up in microfilm and microfiche. And we went
Isn't
to
that
the
amazing? The
Automotive
microfiche
Duesenberg.
back in the
Yeah,
day, you could
I know.
spend so much time searching.
I
Wow,
know.
that's what the interfaces look like. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So.
And so, yeah, so we went on a trip to the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum. Like, so there was this sort of continual ratcheting up. We went to, to car shows and things like that. Even though he wasn't particularly interested in it himself, he knew that I was, and he knew to foster that interest. Fast forward 50 years later, 40 something years later, I did a very long article about E.L. Cord for, one of the Haggerty luxury magazines. I can't remember what it was called now, Radius or something like that.
Right.
And so that I was like, I finally finished my report. I said
I love
to my
it.
dad, I was like,
Set
I
the
finally
record
finished my
for the
report, Dad.
longest research report ever.
Yeah, longest
Let's go
research
back to
project.
Let's go back to the cars that were in the garage when you were growing up, how they changed and how you've reacted to that when you get to spend your own money on cars or what
Yeah.
you go and ask for to test drive.
Sure, yeah. So, like I mentioned, we had pretty much a GM only stable. And the earliest car that I remember, my mom had a Vega, like a first year Chevy Vega, which was kind of a cool looking vehicle. It was complete and utter shit. And
That's beside the point,
if
right?
it was broken, before it was out of warranty, I think, or something like that.
Incredible.
But she had one of those. We had like a Chevy mid '70s Chevy Malibu wagon,
Mm.
with the way back. Um, and my father was a pharmacist. He got like a company car for some reason every couple of years, and it was always sort of just this very middling level of like Oldsmobiles, Pontiacs, and Buicks, and not nothing sporting a Cutlass Saloon or something like that. Um, they were just like completely innocuous forms of transport, essentially,
Like consistently
and
unremarkable.
consistently unremarkable. As were a lot of cars in that era. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't
And
think it's
so
confined to that era. I think it's running right at the moment. So
true. But we had a neighbor who worked in the automotive industry, ran a body shop, and he always had interesting cars. And had Mercedes, a lot of
Mm.
different Mercedes vehicles that I used to go over and look around. And I would ride my bike around the neighborhood. People were into cars. People had weird cars in their garages or that they took out for. There was a neighbor that had like a '59 Cadillac with the towering tail fins, and I would
Yeah.
ride over when the garage was open and just like go up and stare at it. Must have
Yeah.
thought I was such a weirdo. And other neighbors that had other interesting and oddball vehicles. So when it came time for me to get my first car, um, I had my heart set on a BMW 2002.
oh
Um,
wow,
Ooh, good
yeah.
and
choice.
so I ended up with a 1973 2002 that was rusty and problematic. And I worked probably 20 something hours a week at a pizzeria when I was growing up in high school, and every single cent I earned went into that car. And I got it. I got it. I got it fixed up by my neighbor who had the body shop, actually, with a whole bunch of new sheet metal, new hood, new fenders, new rocker panels, and new paint job and stuff like that. And almost immediately after I got it back, someone rear-ended me and
Oh,
totaled it.
jeez.
Um,
Oh no.
so that was kind of a
Never
sad
happens
story.
when it's old and rusty. Only when you
Right.
get to find a new one.
Oh.
Never.
Every
Yeah.
time.
So
Exactly.
you had
Yeah.
the full circle classic car ownership experience right away.
Yeah.
I did, yeah.
That's
So, I got bit by that bug, and I sort of, I went for a long period of time not having an older vehicle. I lived in New York, pretty much full time, although we started renting a place in the country really early on when I was 20, 24. My boyfriend and I have been together for 34 years. So, very early on,
mm.
we started doing that, and so we needed to get some vehicles. So I did have a '79 Volvo wagon, and then I had a 70 or '71 Volvo 164. So the four door with the dual carb straight six, which was hilarious. And those were both cars that were under $500 each or something like that. So I had some old really shitty cars for a period of time. Um, and then up here, once we bought the house, I bought a 1984 Jeep Grand Wagoneer.
Nice.
Oh, I love
And
those.
when that fell apart, I got another one. It's an
You didn't learn the
'87,
first
and
time?
then no, no. Truly a terribly built vehicle.
Yes.
A
It just
wonderful
has
Kenosha,
so
vehicle.
much
Wisconsin, represent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
that's
much
A
charm and
wonderful,
nostalgia, but yeah, the
a
quality.
wonderful vehicle, and amazing capability and great luxury and stuff like that. But yeah,
mm.
so I got rid of those, and I got a '72 Suburban, and
Oh,
then
that's
that
awesome.
rotted out to its core from being driven around in the winter, which is what I'd bought it for. And I bought a 1990 Range Rover, having not learned any lessons. And I
Uh,
still have that, although it's my boyfriend likes to say it typically comes home for summer vacation and then it spends the rest of its year at the shop. And this year it didn't even make it home for summer
oh,
vacation.
no
It's been in
kidding.
the shop
Oh
since
no.
last summer. But my mechanic just texted me right before I got on this call saying that
That's
we finally got the part that we've been looking for. There's a brake booster for those vehicles that is
oh wow.
apparently unobtainium, and we had to have it rebuilt by a shop in Tucson that specializes
Oh
in
wow.
these.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
and for it's like it's this big. It's like $1,300 or something like that to have the part rebuilt. Anyway, it's getting installed, and yeah, so that
If
will
you
come
need any
back home at
bits
some
sent from
point.
England, let me
Yeah.
know. There's plenty of
That's right.
specialty places around, so no
All right,
problem.
Yeah.
right on. I might take you up on that.
Yeah.
It
So, and that's your car today. That's
Yep, that's current. And
yep.
I have a few other.
love
I have
it.
a few other classics. Just sold a 1979 Fiat Spider.
Mhm.
Right.
My younger brother, and I own a few cars together. That was one of them. We had bought and sold a '77 Accord, like a real time capsule,
Mhm.
Accord that sat in a Honda showroom for as like a sort of like a heritage model for
Yeah.
30 years or something like that. Um, we also have a 1972 Saab 95 wagon, which
Nice.
is
Oh wow.
in the shop getting paint, but it's been in the shop getting paint for over a year. So hopefully that'll get done at some point. And then we have a 1978 Porsche 928, which
Oh, fantastic.
actually runs. But we're in
Go
the
figure.
process
Yeah.
of getting ready, I think. I know, exactly. Well, for a long time, the Fiat was my most reliable vehicle. I never really
Really,
had any
really.
problems.
Yeah.
Saying
Never left
something.
me stranded, never broke down. Um, but yeah, we're in the process of probably planning to get rid of just about everything in the classic stable. Just maybe clear the deck, take a little break, and then think about maybe what's one thing I really want, or what's one thing we really want to share, or
Well, you
something
get
like that.
exposure to a lot of products, don't you? You obviously, write about cars, you go to launches and get to test drive, and I believe you and Lindsay were lauding it up somewhere recently. And
Oh, and the
so,
Kindred Broncos.
yeah,
Oh
for me,
yeah, that's right.
for me going to Car Week and going to Tour d'Elegance, it was a real revelation for me. I've always been about carbon fiber and technology and engineering, but I stood there and I looked at some amazing cars from back in the day and thought, we've kind of lost something, I think, in a lot of today's cars. Do you feel the same? Do you see a similar thing, or do you think we are on point in what we're producing today?
Well, I think I see both sides of it. I think, cars are in so many ways, demonstrations of their era, right?
Yeah.
They can't be separated oftentimes from the time
Mm.
period in which they were produced, and they shouldn't. They're
Yeah.
exemplars of design, of engineering, of material science, of ideas of brand, of ideas of luxury, of a sense of what consumers desire, how consumers project information about themselves. So
Mm.
there's so
Right.
much tied up. There's so much tied up in the automobile, and so and also when we are at a place like Monterey Car Week, what we're looking at is pinnacle cars, right? And
Right.
these are pinnacle cars from their era, and they're pinnacle contemporary cars. So there are not a lot of Camrys or Rav4s
Right.
around at Car
Even
Week.
one Cybertruck I saw, so that was
Right, yeah,
interesting. So,
exactly.
That's
So there's
that's a
that.
great point.
It's a
Yeah.
self-selected group.
Yep.
yeah.
And I think, that, if you look at an event where they're showing off the greatest bespoke limited edition, few off vehicles, like a lot of the new cars that were being shown at places like the Quail or on the Concept Lawn or at Pebble Beach and ancillary events. These are that kind of car that is on the
True.
grounds at the Concours. So, if you compare a Duesenberg SJ to a Singer, or to a new one-off Lamborghini or Rolls Rolls-Royce or something like that. These are parallel vehicles.
It's a
You
great
know,
point.
Yeah.
this is a you know the ultimate expression. You know, a Rimac or something like that. These are the
Yeah.
ultimate expression of where we are in this moment of sport in
Yeah.
sport and
And
luxury vehicles.
I wonder how today will be viewed in 60, 70 years' time when we have cars like the Zinger, we have um, a plethora of supercars and some really good and really interesting concepts. But then you have the crossover of ICE and EV, and you know how that's going to play out over time. I've worked at Rivian for 6 years. I've worked at McLaren for a ton of years, and yeah, I'm seeing behind the curtain in both companies and what they believe in and what they're striving and what they think the future is going to hold. And it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. But what's your view on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think this is one of the wondrous things about cars, and one of the great things about loving automotive history and being a real fan of automotive design throughout history. I worked on this book that just came out last year called the Atlas of Car Design that
Hmm.
Fiden published, and you know, it's a survey of sort of 650 of the greatest car designs and the most reviled and the most hideous, you know, the most controversial car designs, you know, of the entire history of the automobile. And you know, if we look across that, cars are always this sort of evanescent vision of what the future may hold, right? Because the
Sure.
automobile, unlike most other uh, you know, consumer products, um, takes, you know, 5 to 7 years to develop and bring to market. So auto companies are always sort of at once forecasting and attempting
Mm.
to interpret and replicate consumer needs. And so you always have to be sort of ahead of the curve and, you know, in the midst of the curve. And so cars are always this sort of crazy fantasy of sort of where design might go, where technology might go, where engineering might go, where you know, interior materiality might go,
Yep.
where technology, you know, interior functionality and technology may go, where safety technology and
Mhm.
functionality may go, where powertrain functionality and technology may go. So this is, you know, it's quite literally a test bed for all
Hmm.
of this. So I think, you know, uh, to predict the future, I think, you know, we are at or beyond an inflection point for dealing with the burning of carbon
Yeah.
as a fuel
Hmm.
onboard fuel source, and tailpipe emissions and things like that. So it makes sense that we will go in a direction where those things will be corralled, limited, or eliminated. At what rate that occurs will depend on political will in a lot of ways, because it's going to be driven by regulation
Well,
more than anything
I
else.
will say, sorry, just to jump in. So the
Yeah, no
EPA do
problem.
a lot of obviously, you know, tests and regulations that you have to comply with, and they've pretty much made it impossible to continue making internal combustion engines. But what that's done is it's challenged the fuel manufacturers and then the engine designers to try and design produce zero emission fuels and engines that will work with them, like they went from, you know, to unleaded fuel and obviously the adaptation of the powertrains then. So I'm seeing now a massive shift in OEMs to go back to want internal combustion engines and lobbying to the EPA and governing bodies or governments to say we're not going to make 2030. So it's a real challenge at the moment, and yeah, I think someone's going to have to back down, and I think it's probably going to be the governments, if I'm really honest, because I'm seeing what's being designed and what's coming through in a multitude of companies that where I have friends and exposure, and I'm not seeing the biggest, you know, shift that there has to be for the EV sector to work.
Yeah, I mean, getting everyone to convert to EV in the next, you know, 5 to 7 years would be an extreme challenge. Is it a worthwhile, is the elimination of emissions, tailpipe emissions, a worthwhile goal and a necessary goal if we want to
Absolutely.
preserve the planet? Yes. So,
Yeah. How we get
it,
there is
it
the question. So
yeah,
Yeah.
is it possible for it to occur? I think it is possible. Anything's sort of possible. But I was just working on this story for Bloomberg. It's going to come out probably before this podcast airs or whatever. But essentially, I was talking to all of these supercar manufacturers who are introducing brand new, V12 or V16 even engines right now, right? So Bugatti, Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Aston Martin. Ferraris is a carryover, but a new model with the same engine. As to why and how this is occurring, and essentially they were like, unless someone says to us, you're banned from doing this, we're going to keep doing this for as long as we can and as long as we want. And there's reasons, why these engines are wonderful, and there's reasons why they advance our notions of technology in that realm. And, some of them are hybrids, plug-in hybrids as
Right.
well now. So there's that. But a lot of it is just, these vehicles are made for consumers to whom no is not an acceptable answer,
Mm-hmm.
and they will not be told
Mm-hmm.
that.
Right.
And if you tell them that, that only makes them want it more.
Yep.
And that this is now, increasingly a means of differentiation, right? Whereas Mercedes used to have V12, BMW used to have V12 in, especially Mercedes in a whole range of their products. That doesn't exist anymore. They're not doing that anymore. They seem
it also
unlikely to
goes
bring that
back.
back.
It goes back to what you said before about being a luxury item, something you want to sit in. And my daughter tells me to stop talking about on this podcast my new car, but I have a new 911, and I do genuinely sit in it, for a minute before I go to work, when I'm at work, when I come home, and it's a great environment. And I'm actually running it in sport mode instead of normal because it sounds better. I just enjoy it. I get more return from I'm literally burning money, but it's what it gives me. And I do think I should get something like a Tesla or a Polestar to drive to work. But
Inside jokes.
yeah, but
Okay, no problem.
and I might be forced to do that at some point. But right now, I'm living it as long as I can. So
Yeah, no, it's an interesting time. So yeah, I don't know where things will go. I think there's a lot of forces pushing us away from internal combustion. Uh, does that mean that internal combustion engine vehicles, classics, or vintage vehicles, or even just vehicles that are out on the road, should be eliminated? I don't think so. These vehicles oftentimes, are driven very, very seldom,
Yeah.
very few
Right.
miles and things like that. And, if people are willing to pay, if there's realistic carbon taxes or things like that, then this is an acceptable, small use. Does that mean, so I think, it's a complicated
Yeah.
situation. I think, if we want to answer to the problems that exist, we do need to make a change.
Can we bring this back to Car Week?
yeah,
Sure.
Because this was my very first Car Week.
Oh wow.
Why it's taken me 50 years, I do not know. Probably money, time, all
Yeah.
the other things that keep you
It's
away from
expensive.
something like
Yeah.
it. It really is. But
Resources. Yeah.
absolutely one of the best weeks of my life. It was fantastic. You've probably now, how long have you been going to Car Week? Is
I
it
think this was probably maybe my 15th time or something
15th
like
year?
that. Yeah. So
What are
it's been a
some of
while.
what are some of the changes you've seen? How have the events themselves changed? It turned into these launch, platforms for things.
Yeah.
What about the cars that are being shown on the lawn? Like,
Yeah.
how are things changing, guys?
I'll start with sort of the Concours itself, like the marquee event, the Pebble Beach Concours that happens on the Sunday at the end of Car Week. Um, and the selection there is as good, if not better, more interesting than it's ever been, I think. And this year, obviously there were a couple of post-war cars that made it to the top four. There was a
Right.
preservation class car that won
Mhm.
at Pebble Beach for the first time. So this connotes, some significant shifts in the ways that the judges are understanding the notion of classic vehicles, right? There was a wonderful class of, wedge-shaped concept cars
Yes.
that really, showed the entire evolution, told an amazing historical narrative
Yes.
from the 60s up until the 90s, or maybe even the early 2000s or later, which I thought was fantastic, and just what the Concorde needs to remain relevant. It can't stay focused on solely on those cars from the interwar era, as wonderful and fascinating as they are.
Right.
And there were fewer sort of brass era cars, cars from the early part of the 20th century, which have never really floated my boat personally. And I think, people that are fascinated with those are sort of aging out of not just the hobby, but existence in general.
Right.
Um, and so I think that, I thought there was a really lovely evolution that happened there. And there was a lot of stuff, like there is every year, that I've never seen before, I'd never even heard
Yeah.
of before. And some really interesting combinations of sort of, there was a Tabalago, Sauchik body Tabalago from the late 40s, a post-war car with sort of a pre-war, coach builder that sort of bridged the gap between these eras, which I thought were a really great move in terms of sort of creating, deepening our understanding of automotive history and allowing that page to turn a little bit. I'm 55. I'm an older guy doing the work that I'm doing at this point, but I'm a young guy in the collector car world, in that
Right.
collector car world.
Yeah.
And so, to see the cars of my youth or the era just before it, sort of shown, alongside these classics that were, my personal inroad into loving cars in general, was really great. So let's
Yeah.
start with that. I
Yeah.
think, the event is huge now, right? It's a huge event. It's
Massive.
not just a car. It's not just a car event. It's a luxury lifestyle bacchanal, I like to say. And so
Ding.
there's fashion, and there's there's private aviation, and there's watches, and there's jewelry, and there's food, and there's wine, and there's all these other, all the people peddling every single variation of all of that kind of stuff. And for me, as a luxury lifestyle journalist, this is my Olympics. You know what I mean? There's like a zillion events to cover. I had
It's
I had
Christmas.
12 assignments when I was at Monterey Car Week this year. You know what I mean? And
Wow.
that's on me. Like I take the assignments, but this is a real, this is a real opportunity for me to sell stories and make
Mm.
a living. Um, so that part about it is great. So the other
Yeah.
part that's great is manufacturers are more increasingly or ongoing willing to showcase their heritage at these events. Mercedes has always been great about this, but other brands are getting in on the bandwagon as well. BMW, Lamborghini, Land Rover, some of the other brands that really have a strong history, Cadillac, Lincoln, that have a strong history within this realm, and can really use this as an opportunity to tell their brand story and to showcase models from their history. So I got to drive, 1932 Maybach Zeppelin, right? I got to drive 1970 Mercedes C11, that Gullwing orange concept coupe
Wow.
that they
Yeah.
produced.
What was that
Um,
like to drive?
Yeah. That's
I mean, I did a story about this sort of notion of, people sort of complaining about how Monterey Car Week is a terrible time to drive. And it is for in a lot of ways.
Oh, I read it.
Uh,
Yeah,
you
it
know,
was good.
yeah, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of things that sort of work against you. But the opportunities to be in and be seen and be a part of, these sort of amazing historic vehicles is really a wondrous thing. I drove a Mercedes, R63, sort of that hot rod minivan that they made for a while in the Audis, as well, up from Los Angeles. So, for me, the experience of driving these vehicles, is usually relatively short lived for a variety of different reasons. But you know, it's just a chance to sort of get a taste of what these things were like, back in the day, and to understand how how they compare to contemporary vehicles, how they're similar, how they're different, how the experience of being in and around them and with them is similar or different. And so, it's fantastic. This was the Maybach was it's 8-liter V12 or something like that. It was, it's a crazy experience to drive a vehicle like this. And so you just have to remind yourself, not to bring your contemporary set of metrics to the experience, right? And I feel this honestly, but to just be like wowed by the adventure and experience of being able to get behind the wheel of something like that. This is not something that most people get to do, and like I am
No.
so appreciative of those chances. And each year I've been fortunate to have some of those experiences. So that was another great thing about Car Week. I would say the one thing that has changed that I feel like is in a way that's not necessarily working as well for me is the quail. Um,
I was
and
wondering.
this
I
is
was going
this
to
sort
ask
of
you about that.
very exclusive event that happens on the Friday at the Quail Resort. It's a peninsula property. So it's a lovely event. It used to be this sort of very small select group of really refined classic cars and a few sponsors and food and drinks and such. And I am not one of these people that thinks things should remain the way that they are intractably forever just because that was the way they were when I first experienced them. I'm all for, I live in New York City. It is a constantly shifting urban fabric and environment, and part of the joy of it is the fact that it changes, that architectural styles are represented from their eras, that things get torn down and new things get built. I love preservation as well, so I'm glad that there are areas that are preserved that have historical significance, but a lot of it doesn't. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
okay for things to change. So I'm not saying this like nothing should ever change, but the Quail now is very much a new car show for for small high end manufacturers and then some other
Right.
larger luxury manufacturers. This makes perfect sense. You know, we don't really have auto shows in the same way as we used to anymore. I've done a couple of stories, one from Vanity Fair several years ago, one for the New York Times just a few years ago, about why this makes sense. And it's in part because, this is where their consumers are. Uh, they are all there, literally.
Right.
I was at a Bugatti event at one point. They had sold. This is when the Veyron was still around. They had sold whatever several hundred of them, and they had I think something like 80 or 90 of their customers there. So it's like this is a very high proportion
Amazing.
of the people that have purchased these cars. So these
Yeah.
people are there, and they are doing. The manufacturers are doing deals at the event. They're selling cars, and they're and it's a lot cheaper than putting up a big stand in an auto show. They're there, in the perfect overlap of rich people and people that love cars. Like our circles are concentric
Right.
almost entirely at Car Week, so it makes perfect sense. But for me, as someone who loves classic cars, I was running around, from interview to interview, sort of checking out new things that were being revealed because I needed to for my job. And I did look at the selection of vehicles that was at the Quail, and I wasn't really amazed. You know what I mean? I didn't see stuff. It's sort of been reduced to this little narrow alley in the middle,
Right.
and the selection of vehicles there wasn't as fantastic as I felt like it had been in the past. So,
A-
maybe that's a
anything in particular stand out to you though? I agree with
oh
your opinion of the quail, but anything in
yeah.
particular?
In terms of the new vehicles
Yeah.
that were shown on offer there, I'm trying to remember what was there that really hit me. I guess not.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. If
quite
you have to,
telling,
Maybe
isn't
if you
it?
have to
right.
That's
pause.
your answer, right?
Yeah, right. I guess that. I mean, and maybe I didn't look at everything. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because I had some stuff I needed to do.
And
Anyway,
for
that was
me,
a long-winded
that
answer.
was the contrast. Like I say, my sort of epiphany when I was at realization when I was at Tour de Elegance, and then sitting on the Lamborghini stage and watching all these cars cruise past. I felt exactly the same, and maybe that was just the one year that I locked in and seeing great classic cars and maybe a less special supercar paddock, and it kind of maybe got this thinking in my head of are we heading in the right path? Do we know really what the customer wants? I'm a big fan of the Bugatti, obviously, Tour
Oh yeah.
Boulogne. I think that is luxury, that is a jewel. But where is everyone else?
Well,
What
and
are
the
they
focus
chasing?
has shifted so much, like you were saying, Brett. I mean, I can't I can't count how many times I heard people say, fill in the blank manufacturer debuted such and such car and sold out in 5 minutes at the Quail. And that seems to really be their focus and intent going forward.
Yep, yep. And like I said, it makes perfect sense, but maybe that means that like that's not going to be such a joyous event for me. Which
Right.
obviously it's not all about me. It's about a business. This is
Isn't
the
it
car
though?
business, right? Yeah. Well, on some level it is. But I'm allowed to have my opinion about it as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't think any of us on this call were there shopping, but
I
Well,
certainly was not there shopping. Right.
can we talk about wheels for 1 second? Because this is a pet interest of mine. You just wrote this article for Jalopnik, Brett, about Hyundai's wheel program and how
Genesis, yeah.
considered Genesis rather, and how considered it is. And, there's such a thoughtful process. This wasn't always the case, maybe still isn't the case. I've said for years, that these OEMs are putting ugly wheels on the cheap cars and, look at the Porsche Taycan, right? What a hideous selection of wheels until you get to the turbo, right? So let's just nerd out on wheels for a second. We can start with Genesis because I think many people would say that they're doing it right.
Yeah, they're really a manufacturer that is taking risks, and I love that. They don't always nail it necessarily. I feel like, but they really are working very hard at distinguishing themselves and sort of trying to define this notion of, as they say, audacious, distinctly Korean luxury. And audacious is their word. And
I
so
love
I
it.
think, that's exciting for for a flashy tacky bitch like me. I love to see someone really going for it, and their wheel design really exemplifies this. They're bizarre. You know what I mean? They're
That's a
like
good word.
super,
Yeah.
yeah, they're super technical. They're like fractalized. They're inspired by like the oddest shapes in nature, like thrown together with each other. I think I said something in the article, like it looks like they were literally throwing things at the wall to see what sticks and then like making a wheel out of it. But it's obviously more considered than that. And they also have, distinct categories for their more sporting vehicles. They have,
Yeah.
wheels that are a little bit more out there for their more refined, luxurious vehicles. They have, multi-spoke wheels for their electric vehicles. They're working on wheels that, that increase range and efficiency and decrease rolling resistance and weight and things like that. All the manufacturers are doing this, but they really seem to be, as a fledgling luxury brand, and I've been covering Genesis since before it's really launched in a deep way. Went to Seoul simultaneous to the time. I don't know what the Polestar joke is, but I did a story about sort of the launch of Genesis and Polestar
Yeah.
because they were happening simultaneously. So I was in Gothenburg researching that,
Okay.
and in Seoul researching Genesis, and really looking at like how these brands were trying to differentiate themselves within the context of the luxury market, and went into it thinking like these are very, very different brands. That
Mm-hmm.
Genesis is sort of a more traditional luxury brand trying to be sort of like a Lexus, and that Polestar, was trying to be more like Tesla or something like that.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I ended up coming out of it with a different notion that these brands were coming to this from a very similar cultural standpoint.
Mm.
Interestingly, Sweden and Korea, both societies in which differentiation is not really something that should be not something that's admired.
It's not
Where
celebrated.
it's right,
Yeah.
exactly. And that both of them were also coming to it from a point of view of anything that they did do, even if the brand didn't work, would eventually reflect better on the brand, on sort of Hyundai and Volvo, right, and elevate their
Mm-hmm.
position, both of the positions of both of those brands. Um, and so anyway, so Genesis, I think, yeah, is doing some very cool stuff with
You know,
wheels.
I've got to add, living within chassis teams for most of my life, it is the hottest conversation internally is wheel design,
Yeah.
because you're right, there are some amazing wheels, but they get heavier, more complicated to make, and more expensive. And obviously, the challenge is to make things lighter, unsprung mass, better, better range, faster to manufacture, more consistent quality, and wheels are just the biggest challenge ever. They are just
Yeah.
becoming so complicated. And when you do some structural analysis, when you get a design from the studio which looks amazing, and you go, well, actually, it's not strong enough, so we have to change bits, and so we change bits to make them durable. And then you step back and you look at it and you go, we've completely killed the guy's design. And you end up going back saying, can we find something halfway? And it is probably almost the last thing that ever gets released, thankfully, because it's just a bolt-on item as well. It doesn't have to go through stages in the manufacturing plant early on. But it is a hot topic in every company I've worked. So
Yeah. And designers love big wheels. You know what I mean? Like every designer will tell you, I love big wheels, and I can't deny
Brett, for
it.
the
trend.
Yeah, there's a
for the
song
record,
there.
yeah, right. For the record, I do like Polestar. In fact, the joke is that I bought one recently, or leased one, because here in
Oh, wow.
Colorado they were all practically giving the things away.
Yeah.
And for us, it's a much nicer car than the Volkswagen Tiguan that it replaced. But it's and also for someone like me who's not really a fan of Tesla, however we say it, that kind of fit that space, right? There was no way
Yeah.
my
I
wife was
think I'm
getting a
working
Tesla.
on a
So
right. I'm working on a story that's very much about that sort of thing. It's sort of like, are people
yeah,
running from Tesla, not just because there's lots of other things on the market, but because Elon is an asshole. So how is that? How are people responding to that? So anyway, I
yeah,
think you may not be alone in that.
You're in good
right
company.
on.
I think it's
And I
what's
also, for the record,
fueling
have to
other
ask.
EV sales, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. No, I
Sorry,
think you're right. And look at the Teslas, like, just stacking up on parking lots in Vegas and other cities. Thousands of them, right? So I mean, that's got to tell you something. For the record, wheel design, a couple of your favorites. I feel like I read something that you're a fan of, like the AMG monoblock and that look.
Yes,
Or not? Yeah. Okay.
I do. No, I do. I love a disc wheel. I love a monoblock wheel. Rolls-Royce has these amazing disc wheels on its
Yeah.
Phantom, the most recent generation of Phantom, that are like harken back to, sort of the giant disc wheels, alloy discs that Bugatti made in the
Yeah.
30s, that Rolls-Royce made in the 30s, sort of very early, alloy disc wheels. And they're just amazing. And to create something like that for a vehicle of this scale, this is a 3-ton vehicle, that can afford the proper brake cooling and things like that, under heavy load, is really something spectacular. And the finish on them is really amazing. So I love those. There's a bunch of the Genesis wheels that I think look great. I'm into. I love basket weaves. I think this is my
Oh yeah.
80s childhood.
BBS and
Yeah,
yeah.
I think those wheels are a classic. I think they look
Yeah.
good, on a lot of different vehicles. Obviously, as an early 928 owner, I love phone dials. We had to have phone dials. We had to have a car with phone dials that had them original. So I love those wheels, and that sort of goes over into Alfa Romeo vehicles with those sort of Honda wheels as well.
Hmm.
And I'm a huge fan of almost any tri-spoke wheel. I just like,
Oh.
I've always loved odd numbers and odd
Yeah.
shapes.
Yeah.
And my Range Rover has tri-spokes on it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We were looking at one point at some tri-spokes that they made for the X19 for our Fiat Spider, that were super cool. Saab had obviously some great tri-spokes on their SPG
Yep.
vehicles.
My inner structural analysis software is twitching at this.
This is what I love about tri-spokes. That they shouldn't work, but they somehow do.
That's great. That's great. That's great. So can we come back to this idea of a crystal ball? We all know there's some brands that just aren't going to make it in the next 5 years. I mean, there's some obvious ones like Fisker. Buick is a name that I've heard, bandied about. Who's not going to be around 5 years from now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think we're in such an inflection point, like I mentioned before, and there's so many companies that have have tried to make cars thinking like, oh, this is ripe for disruption. Yeah, anyone should throw together an electric vehicle and put it out there, and have learned the lesson the hard way. that wasn't going to happen. Fisker was an obvious one. I called that from the moment it launched.
There's a track record there, isn't there?
Yeah, as charming as Henrik is, and as funny as he is to talk to, he is literally full of shit. And so, it's not possible for something like that to succeed. So that one I knew wasn't going to work. I've been approached about by a number of manufacturers recently. Karma was one of the ones recent. That one's another one that
which
goes
is
back
also
to Fisker,
connected to Fisker.
Exactly. It's been kicking around for 15 years since I first started in this business.
I saw one on the road on the way back from Car Week. Passed it.
Oh, really?
An
actual
Karma.
An actual Karma.
I was sitting at a light with it, going like, "Wait a minute, wait."
They sold 150 of them or something in the past 5 years, whatever it might be. But I met with the CEO, and I told him, very point blank, like, I have electric car startup fatigue, or I have car startup fatigue in general. I cannot tell you how many pitches I get about, this new electric car startup is happening. We've got X billion dollars in investment, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, pull the other one. It's just like, it's not viable to think you can just start a car company, and that it's going to work out. And some of them will, I'm sure. I wasn't sure that Tesla was going to make it. You know what I mean? But they did. They had that's true. Yeah, they were bailed out by the U.S. government, so they did.
Yeah.
But they had a unique product, which isn't the case at this point for any of these other manufacturers. So it's hard for me to imagine that Lucid is going to make it. To be perfectly honest, I hope that they do. They're making a really interesting product. They have, some serious technology for which they might get acquired or something like that. And they've announced some partnerships, that may help them along. But, selling $150,000 sedan in this era isn't exactly the most compelling product offering. And so, I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Karma, have serious doubts that's ever going to make it. To be honest, I'm not sure if Rivian is going to make it. I think that they've got a lot of stuff going for them, but they haven't found a way to make a car profitably so far, which is, again, this is the automotive business. This isn't the automotive hobby. I mean, for some people, it's a hobby. So I think those are ones that I'm not sure about. Buick, it's really got longevity and legs. It's still quite popular in China, although it's not as popular and prestigious as maybe it was in the past. With now that they have much larger homegrown industry. So I don't know. I understand the need that it serves within the GM structure, and I've seen advanced designs for things that they seem to be working on that seem pretty cool. And I think some of their current design in their crossovers, they only sell crossovers at this point, is interesting at the very least, and global in an interesting way that's not solely American, but sort of capitalizes on some of the traditional American motifs. So that's another one that, I feel like that one has a better chance of living. Polestar, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that they're going to make it.
That's why we leased.
Right, exactly. Not smart. I think, that it's, that is, again, a brand that sort of, unless they figure out a way to really differentiate themselves further from Volvo, I think that they're, you're getting 90% of a Polestar in a Volvo for 70% of the money or something like that. So I guess a little bit of that distinction can help, but it's not get inside of it, especially. And like I was saying when we started off, the interior is where luxury really happens at this point. The exterior, you want it to be something you look back at and smile. But this interior is where you spend all of your time. And when you get into a Polestar, you are literally sitting in an exact replica of a Volvo interior. There's nothing different about it. There's nothing that makes it special or distinctive. And that's, that's a certain kind of Swedish practicality, but it's also not luxury.
So let's play a little bit of an off the cuff game here then. So
Sure.
Young family, husband, wife, whatever, 2 kids, dog. What car should they buy today?
I mean, there's so many options, right? I get asked this all the time.
If it was you,
Because
what would you buy?
well, I don't know. Are we going all electric? Are we going hybrid? Do we have a charger at home? Do we live in a single family home? Do we live in the city? Do we commute? There's so many questions.
Yeah.
People buy cars in part out of practical, pragmatic reasons, and a
Yep.
lot out of emotional desire. So cars that intersect with both of those things have a way of working. My daily driver is a 2018 Volkswagen Golf All-Track
Nice.
manual base car.
Nice.
It has everything I wanted. It has all-wheel drive. It's a manual transmission. It has Apple CarPlay, so it has all the technology that I need.
You can put a
And
600 by 600 appliance in the back.
yes,
That's
you can carry a lot of crap.
yep.
It'll go through anything. It wasn't that expensive. It was affordable. So a vehicle like that, an all-arounder like that, is a great solution for me. Of course, now they I think they discontinued that model, and they certainly don't make it with a manual if they do
Yeah.
have it around at all. But I don't think they even have it around anymore. Anyway,
Hang on
so
to
I
that
think
one.
right. Yeah, I will probably keep that for a while. And I think my
Okay.
next car will probably be an electric car. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If my house is wired properly,
Yep.
which I haven't really just
So the next
investigated.
question, kids have grown up, they've left home, and you go, right, we can have something fun and exciting now. What would you do?
Um, hmm. For me personally,
Sure.
I don't know. I'm terrible at answering this question. I feel like I'm so because of my experience in market research, I'm always trying to make cuts. You know what I mean? I'm always trying to think about like, well, for what? People are like, "What's your favorite car?" And I'm like, "Well, for what?" Like,
Yeah, that's
am I
true.
going on a road trip? Am I, I love a Porsche Boxster. You know what I mean? Like, I
Great
think that's a
car.
fantastic car.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's sort of a pinnacle. It's a pinnacle two-seat, fun to drive car, but it's also super pricey at this point. I love a Miata for
Mhm.
a joyous vehicle, but as a daily driver, it's a pain in the ass. It's loud, it's
Yep.
cramped. There's not much space in it for storage or anything like that. So
I was
cars are all about these kind of trade-off and sacrifices.
So it's
I
what?
was at a family event. So I was going to say I was at a family event on the weekend, and there was a friend of ours there, and he's 50 years old as well. He's got or had an Aston, and he said, "Why is it?" He said, "I've always been a car fan, always love Astons. When I'm younger, I don't have the money. Then I go have family, and then I can't justify it because, like you say, circumstances." And he said, "Then it's just the point in my life when I can actually buy it and I can actually use it, and people say, 'Oh, no, you're just having a midlife crisis now.'" So it's like,
Can't win.
I'm all for midlife crisis car purchases. I
yeah,
really am. I'm all in
your
favor
whole
of it. I
life.
feel like
Enjoy it.
yeah, exactly. I like to say all cars are drag. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? These are costumes that we put on and take off to sort of
That is
represent
really true.
what we
It's an
want to the
Yep.
accessory.
world.
Yep.
And yeah, exactly. And to undermine expectations or to play with expectations. So I
I
Yes.
think,
like that.
people are like, I don't know if I can see myself in this kind of car. It's like, well, buy one and find out. You know what I mean?
See what
That's
it's
a great
like to
answer.
actually live that. Well,
Yeah.
and
Right.
Brett, you
Right. How many
mentioned
things can you do that with?
luxury.
Yeah.
You mentioned, the interiors being a huge part of obviously experiencing a car, but that's where, the luxury is too. And Alan, you actually mentioned something about you're spending extra time in your car. And Brett, I wanted to ask you because that was a huge focus when Lincoln launched the Navigator in Monterey. They want the car to be thought of as like the third place, and they want people to spend a few minutes extra when they get home in the car. So I wanted to get your thought on that as far as like, do you think people actually are going to carve out the time to do that?
Yeah. I think this is largely bullshit. To be perfectly
There
honest.
we go. That's what there's the
Yeah.
soundbite.
But if you are being chauffeured around in a Lincoln Navigator or or whatever it might be, that's fantastic. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
those kinds of experiences. You turn on the seat massage, you turn on the
The
whatever
scent
perfume,
and the
yeah, the perfume that
soundscape.
comes out and the soundscape that comes on or whatever. But
Right.
typically. that's not, you're not going to seek that. You're not going to seek out that experience as a driver when you come home. You know what I mean? Like all of those comforts are hopefully in your house. Um,
Yeah.
so,
True.
in your
Yeah, and
home.
I realized, I bring we all like you said, we all bring our own perspective from whatever life we're living in the communities we're part of, and I was looking at it as, okay, I have a child, I have a pet, extra time, especially just to sit is really at a premium, if not non-existent. So I was
Yeah.
going, as they were speaking about it, I went, this sounds lovely. When are you going to be able to do that? I'm really
Yeah.
curious how many people actually end up taking advantage of it with any
Yeah.
regularity.
Yeah.
I find it hard to imagine that anyone takes advantage of a lot of those programs. They're flashy and they're interesting.
Right.
When we hear about them or when they're shown to us or whatever, and BMW has them and Mercedes has them or whatever.
Right.
Like, don't get me wrong, I like massaging seats. You know what I mean? I have
Same. Who's going to
sciatica.
turn that
I'm an
down?
old man, right? Like, I'm not opposed to that. I like a lot of ambient colors in the car. I like the
Right.
Starlight headliner.
Mm.
I like all forms of like delight. You know what I mean? Like a retracting knob for your shifter, like vents that open and pop out of the head, pop out of the dashboard. Like I love all of
Anything that
that stuff.
brings, novelty and
Yeah.
joy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I like all of that stuff. Like I'm a huge fan of that. I think that really oftentimes adds to the experience, so long as it continues working, of
There you go.
vehicle leasing or ownership. But
Yeah. Yeah.
seeking out additional time to spend in your car, people already spend too much time in their car. So if it's stuff that
It's
is
true. Yeah.
practical, like I love distance cruise control and super cruise and the new highway driver assistance features.
Right.
I think those are fantastic for reducing a little bit of load and brain load and fatigue on long trips, and they work. Some of the best ones work really well. So if it adds to my joy and my experience, that's great. If it's meant to increase the amount of time that I'm spending in my car, I'm not so much for it. I just don't think that's what people are looking for.
Right.
And this is why we like you, because you tell it like it is.
And
And
we expect those answers.
we
That's for sure.
we've asked you for an hour. We're an hour and 20 minutes already.
Okay,
So I
well,
don't want to keep you too much longer, although I know we could talk to you all day, and I hope that you'll come back sometime and we can talk to you
okay.
again. But I have to ask, as sort of the consummate professional in your field, can you share a couple of other people who you really respect who are in this world, journalists, content creators, people who you really think are doing it right that we should all be
Oh,
following?
wow. Wow. Putting me on the spot. All right.
And we can cut
I'll
this
name a
out
couple
if
of
you
people. No, no, no.
can.
It's all right. No, no, no. I have a couple of people. They're friends of mine. My friend Alana Scher,
Oh
who
yeah.
Mm,
is the editor at Car and Driver, um,
yeah.
is
She was
just a
at the Kindred
fantastic.
event with us.
Yeah, yeah. She's a fantastic storyteller. She writes really interesting articles. She's my editor as well, so she understands my interests and proclivities and wanting to link the car to lots of other things. But she's a fantastic person, has a huge depth of knowledge. Owns 21 cars, the oldest of which I think is a 1912 Dodge or something
I
like
was going to
that.
say she is a
Wow. I
Um,
had
true
no
driver
idea.
and
she's a
enthusiast
Wow.
too.
Yeah, and she's a hot rodder, and you know what I mean. She's great. Um, I also recommend my friend Tamara Warren, who is another freelancer like myself, who writes a lot about cars and culture, and the intersection of cars and art and fashion and
Mm.
things like that. So I think she's a great person as well. I'm going to name all ladies. My
That's
friend
fine.
It's
We'll take
okay.
it.
Yeah.
Hannah Elliott, who's the
Oh yeah.
car
Love Hannah.
reviewer
Yeah.
for Bloomberg. It's just brings a real exuberance and knowledge
She's
to
cool.
the automotive world, and just I feel like has a unique and interesting perspective. Um,
Well,
so let's
especially in
start with
terms of the cars and luxury, like you were saying, like she
Mm.
has a very
exactly.
distinct eye for that. I ran into she and Magnus and Carmel during Car Week.
All right. Yep.
They always
They're
just look so cool, just out
Right.
and about, right? Like, come
very
on.
cool. Right. They are
They
cool.
are.
So I'm gonna start with those three.
Okay,
So
no,
if
fair.
you're
Those are
if
great
you're
Love it.
answers.
if
Yeah,
you're if
yeah.
you're if your listeners are not already following Alana, Elana, Tamara, Tamara, and Hannah, Hannah. they should find them and follow them.
Yeah, I'm
And we
excited
should
to
all be
check out
following.
Tamara.
Yeah, we should all be following you as well, Brett. We can find you at brettberk.com, BRETTBERK.
Instagram, I'm the real Brett Berk. If you're looking for me
right.
on Instagram,
That's
that's
the
where
one.
I am.
That's the one. What a pleasure talking with you, Brett. Truly. Again, I hope we can do this again sometime. I mean, you really are a student of this, and you're also a teacher. And you know, really, like I said, you are that consummate automotive journalist. I learned a few things today. Enjoyed talking with you. What a pleasure.
Definitely.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
so
you all
much.
for your time and thanks for having me on. Yeah, let's do this again sometime, and we won't have to go through the whole introductory part. We can
Right.
get down to business. And really
Exactly.
Sounds good.
Talking some smack.
Yeah.
I love it. Now I know you're really honest.
We'll
We're
get to
gonna
the real info.
questions next time are going to be way better. So
Yeah, this was
I
such
can't
a
wait.
treat.
I
It was
can't.
great to
Yeah.
see you.
Absolutely.
Lovely to
Thank
see
you
you
so
all.
much, Brett. All right. Take care.
thank you very much.